Welcome to Tell Me a Story. Ordinary people telling true stories from the heart. I'm Bryce Halliday. In September 2013, our theme was The Riddle. We heard an enthralling story from former boxer Danny Morgan.
Thank you. How are you? I grew up in Wagga, which is a town about 6 hours southwest of Sydney. And Wagga in the 80s was the kind of place where if you were different in any way, you could be a little bit of a target. My dad's Australian, but my mum's Greek. So from pretty much the first day of school, because I inherited her complexion, I got picked on and teased a lot. And it got pretty bad. It got to the point where my mum had to go up to the school at one stage because one of the teachers was actually like getting involved like with the kids and all that. And as a little kid, I really didn't know how to cope with that. I didn't have a clue. But in around year 5, I had a growth spurt, and all of a sudden I was bigger than most of the other kids in the year. And for the time being, I didn't realise that. I was almost like a little kid in a big kid's body. But one day in the playground, there was this other fella picking on me and calling me names and stuff, and he challenged me to a fight. He said, "Come on, let's fight. I'll give you first hit." And I still can't even remember actually consciously making a decision, but I just kind of bunched my fist up and I swung it, and it hit him up high on the temple, and he went down on the ground. He just was blubbering and crying and whatnot, and all the kids came running over, all the other kids in the playground, and the teacher came running over to see what happened. I just kind of took off. I still don't know how I didn't get in trouble for that, but I didn't get in any trouble. And it's like when I hit that kid, the whole complexion of the schoolyard just changed. Changed who I was straight away. And for the rest of primary school, everyone just left me alone. For the next year and a half, people just left me alone and gave me a wide berth. And that day was pretty pivotal in my life, because I kind of realised, well, if people hassle you, you just have to hit them. And then they go away, and that would become something of a drug for the next 20 years of my life. But when I got to high school, everything changed again, because I went back from being like the biggest kid in the school to the littlest kid all of a sudden, and all of my problems came back tenfold, and I was always getting into trouble in high school. I was always getting into fights, on a weekly or monthly basis or whatever, and I was lucky to get through high school without sort of getting expelled. The vice principal at the high school I went to actually couldn't stand me. He tried to expel me on many occasions, but the principal, my dad had gone to the same school, and the principal knew my dad, so the principal kind of, every time the vice principal would have me all set up to be expelled, the principal would kind of hop in and veto it, much to the hatred of the vice principal. Happened on a few occasions, but so growing up I was always getting into trouble, and my home life was difficult as well. And the person that pretty much came to personify a lot of those things was my stepfather. He was a fella that was from the wrong end of the tracks. He'd spent time in prison. He had a really violent upbringing himself. I remember he had a big old tattoo on his forearm with like a naked lady, and at the bottom of that tattoo it said "Men's Ruin." And I don't think anyone would want their mum going out with someone like that. So me and him, we butted heads on many occasions. Got physical more than once. There wasn't a great deal I could do, because he was like a big, strong man that knew how to handle himself, and I was like a teenage kid. And one day he left. He just left us. He took off and he left us in a really horrible financial situation, and myself and my mum and my sisters. And to this day I still don't know how my mother got us through that time, but she did. She's an incredibly resourceful woman. Along with my grandmother, she'd have to be one of the toughest one of the toughest people I've ever met. And things were difficult growing up. And when my stepfather left, I vowed that if I ever saw him as a man, I was going to be settling accounts with him, wherever I might bump into him. But he just pretty much disappeared. And I didn't do well at school. I did pretty terribly. I flunked out. So when I finished school, I moved to Sydney because I couldn't get a job in Wagga. I got a job as a bouncer in a nightclub in King's Cross, and I ended up working up there for about 11 years in the clubs. That's a whole other story I don't have time to go into today. At that same time, I got involved in boxing, and I absolutely loved boxing from the second I started doing it. I ended up having about 40 boxing matches, and I was a state champion and Australian rated professional. Travelled all over the country boxing, had some absolutely brilliant adventures. But behind all of that, I was very driven by anger. Had a deep, seething anger inside me, and the only way at the time that I knew to kind of get that out was to fight. Fight in the clubs and fight in the ring, and that's what I did for many years. And in 2004, I accepted a fight up in Queensland. And from the second I accepted the fight, I just had a very strange feeling about the fight. I had this ominous feeling like something's going to happen. I didn't even know what I was thinking, but I pretty much just pushed those feelings aside and trained for the fight for 6 or 7 weeks, because as a fighter, that's what you do. You learn to shut out external things and just focus on the job that you have at hand. And the fight day came around, and I turned up, flew up to Queensland with my trainer and some other fellas that were also fighting on the show, and went to the weigh-in and did all the rules meeting and all the stuff you do when you're having a boxing match. And the evening of the fight came around, and I was the main event, so I was the last fight on, like the headliner. And I just had my hands taped up. I just had my hands wrapped by the guy that does that. And I had to go to the toilet. And to go to the toilet in this place, you had to walk through the crowd to the toilets of the back. So I started walking through the crowd, and all of a sudden, my heart almost stopped, because it was my stepfather there. And I hadn't seen him in 10 years, almost 10 years to the day, actually. I worked out later. And I didn't even believe I couldn't believe it was him at first. And he didn't see me, but I went off to the side, and I just watched him for a while, and it was him because he had like an old injury, like a rugby league injury, and he used to stand like a little bit funny. And yeah, he was standing the same way, and I just knew it was him. I actually found out later on that it was. I found out he was living up there, and so I walked off the toilet and went back to the change rooms, just in a complete state of shock. I always vowed if I saw that man, I was just going to execute him where he stood. But I couldn't really do that because I was the main event on the show, and I was good friends with the promoter, and it wasn't going to be a good look doing something like that. So I put it out of my mind, and I just focused on the fight. And finally the time came, and I walked out and hopped in the ring. And in this fight, I went somewhere I've never been before or since. At one point, it's almost as if, I ceased to exist, because every ounce of my being was just completely consumed with just surviving that ring. It was an incredibly tough fight. I had to absolutely work my guts out for every inch just to survive. And actually would have been an easy fight, but my arm was fractured very early on. I threw a punch, and the punch missed, and it just tore my left elbow right up, and I'm left-handed, so it pretty much rendered me, defenseless with 50% of an arsenal against a guy that was really capable. I think had I not been injured, I would have got him out of there in 4 or 5 rounds. But because of my injury, it turned into this pitched battle that just went on and on. For every minute seemed like an hour, just trying to survive in there with this fella. And I reached I had to reach very, very deeply down inside myself. And when I was there, I found something. I realised that I was never going to quit in that ring that night. That guy, he was going to have to kill me or knock me out, because there was no way I was ever going to quit. And I worked something out, because I think when you're a little kid and you get teased and picked on and whatnot, and then you grow up and become a man, everything you do as a man is for that little kid, And I was just, you just, when that's happened to you and when you've had to eat shit in your life and then you grow up and you don't have to do it anymore, you'll fucking die before you do that again. And eventually the fight ended and I lost the fight. I should have been completely dejected because I lost the fight, as you would be. But I'll never forget, I was standing up there in the ring and my face was just like a balloon from getting hit and all that. But I remember just feeling myself smile up there in that ring, and it just felt like this massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders, like this terrible, poisonous, like this dark cloud I carried around all those years was just gone. Like physically, like in the way, just say you have like a back injury for years and years and you're in pain, and then one day you wake up and then that injury is just not there anymore. That's how it felt. It was absolutely amazing. And at that point I realized like, you don't have to do this anymore. It's over. You don't have to fight anymore. It's finished. And when I realized that, it was the most simple thing on earth to work that out. But everything is simple, after you work it out. I never fought again. Thanks very much.
Tell Me a Story is recorded live on the second Sunday of every month at the Roxbury Hotel in Glebe. The show is produced and hosted by Catherine Bendel. You can find us on the web at tellmeastory.net.au.